Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our interview with Laetitia Hoffmann. Laetitia is a global head of due diligence at Dow Jones. She is responsible to ensure the continued success of the Dow Jones due diligence business globally by setting the product strategy, responding to market developments, and driving innovation. So, Laetitia, thank you so much for joining us today for our Risk Management Show podcast interview.
Hi, Boris. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. So I believe that we will have a very thoughtful conversation on the topic of trends in AI automation, specifically ChatGPT and new version and such technologies' impact on compliance. So, but before that, Laetitia, could you tell us a short story about your career path? What brought you to where you're right now?
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm a career due diligence person. I kind of stumbled into the industry via an internship when I was living in the US, pursuing a degree. And yeah, I started out as a researcher, really getting in the weeds and understanding the type of risks and different types of research, and realized then that I'm really quite intrigued by the industry and would like to continue to pursue my career there. And yeah, most recently, I have the wonderful chance at Dow Jones to make an impact.
Oh, yeah, fantastic. So I know that in the fast-moving and highly competitive AI sector, developers claims that their AI tools can make critical predictions with a high degree of accuracy. So we will today discuss these aspects. But first, I would like to ask you, Laetitia, how has AI automation technology changed the compliance and the due diligence process?
I think when we look at AI technology, we can see that it's already having a huge impact on the industry. I think they are already very much a reality, all the way from screening tools that are able to digest a whole load of unstructured data and kind of narrow down results, as well as sophisticated workflow tools. So to varying degrees and of purpose, AI is very much already a reality when it comes to compliance tools across industries.
Mm-hmm. So what is specifically about this ChatGPT? We all know that it kind of grew up very rapidly during this few months, and even surpassed the growth of other platforms such as Facebook and others before. So what is specific about this tool?
Yeah, so ChatGPT is a generative AI chatbot. It's basically a very sophisticated NLP. And as of 2 days ago with GPT-4, it can ingest text and pictures and basically put a human readable output, machine-generated output to the consumer. So it's really easily digestible what it puts down, and it can analyze and put together a tremendous amount of data and synthesize it for the consumer of that output.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think can this tool be used when conducting due diligence in the framework of customer due diligence, or, for example, third-party risk management?
I think at this point, there's a number of issues that would arise when using ChatGPT, in particular in the context of compliance and compliance decisions. So first of all, the technology is not supposed to be a compliance tool in itself. It's supposed to be a summarization tool, and that is its purpose. Also, the T's and C's of OpenAI itself say don't use this for any kind of serious purposes, and don't use it for that. But I do think that we will see generative AI such as ChatGPT or GPT-4 in the compliance space, and to enable this kind of output when it comes to compliance decision making. So I think at this point, and in this particular iteration, GPT and similar solutions on the market aren't quite fit for purpose for a number of reasons, really.
Mm-hmm. And how does it impact industry at large? Or perhaps there are some, you mentioned some other competitors. Do you feel there will be some changes in the industry because of this ascent of this tool. So what is your opinion?
Yes, I do think so. I think, first of all, it's really set the hallmark of what's possible. Like, it allowed us all to kind of, I suppose, dream of the summarization that would be possible for what is often a very, very long-winded, human-intense process. The industry itself is faced with kind of contrasting forces. People need to be faster, decisions need to be made quicker, budgets are smaller, and there's then labor cost, inflation. So there's a lot of pressure on the industry to really perform high, all in the wake of ever increasing legislative demands. So a tool like this could really enable streamlined processes for a number of professionals within the industry, and thereby be quite useful. So I think once we all saw this, it's almost like a light bulb went up and everybody just went, oh my God, this would be amazing. I think it generates really a conversation about automation, and is taking the discourse about what we would want from an output to a different level. It almost dares people to dream of how it could, how we could approach complex processes that are at the moment still quite human-driven. And it would, of course, be taking it away from like integrating a different set of resources, and more into like an overall desire of creating output that enables contextualization of sources, and a type of understanding that might be difficult to replicate for those, for example, who have a global remit. Like, what could it do for a team that has a global remit with limited language capacity in-house? You know, like what can this kind of technology enable us to do when it comes to the ingestion of sources? I think GPT in itself, it's kind of been a moniker for a lot of generative AI. It's been the one that's on the most in the media, I think. So we all hear about it all the time. But there's other players. I think there's a lot of movement when it comes to generative AI in the space. We've got Scale, Google Cloud Platform. There's a lot of different technologies out there. It's not the only one, but it's really creating a discourse about the limits of the possible when it comes to these sophisticated language programs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we discussed the advantages of these tools, and let's do some a little bit about what are the biggest hindrances of using these tools like ChatGPT when it comes to specifically diligence investigations.
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, right now, it's based on data from 2021. I think that in itself makes it already very difficult in practical application at this point, right? Because we often need to, or we always need more up-to-date data. A second aspect that's difficult is that it's not supposed to cite where it got the information from. So it is a bit of a black box of sources. It's not really giving you the origination of where all the information it generated came from. When like playing around a little bit, it's quite good in identifying higher profile subjects, but it's not as good in disambiguating kind of your everyday Joe, so to speak, when looking into it. And that can be challenging, because that is where a lot of time gets invested in you want to make sure that John Smith here in this adverse situation is actually the one you're talking about, and that you're not making critical decisions based on misinformation that result from disambiguation. Being a chatbot also, it requires a certain level of interaction, and we all use speech a little differently, also in our written form and depending on language. So I'd be concerned about the replicability of queries across teams, because you would need to direct the query in a certain way that generates a similar output. Other than that, I think, I mean, as I said earlier, the OpenAI themselves state do not use this for critical decision making. It is not in that space. I also, it's based on a certain set of training data. Currently, also when people use it, it uses the input in order to continue to train. But that leaves a number of problems. One would be, for example, if you input sensitive information, that could be difficult from a data privacy perspective, from all sorts of perspectives, from a legalistic perspective. That sounds kind of nightmarish. But then also risk taxonomies vary. What is risky for one is not risky for another. Who determines what a risk is and what the output is? Where do we set the line if we are not able to have a discussion on that? That being said, doesn't mean that those challenges couldn't be overcome from the outset of the technology, but it is something that I think currently poses a hindrance. And then, I mean, we'll have to see when it comes to kind of forthcoming legislation. For example, in the EU, I think generative AIs will be classified in a number of different tiers that will require different levels of oversight, making sure that for example, you can't make critical decision making just based on some output. There needs to be some quality check in order to assure that the output is accurate, that it's and that it can be relied upon. And these are just like a number of things that I would say in the current form would make a difficulty for its application. I think when it comes to the future, though, and it's anybody's guess. I don't think these are not overcomable issues, and it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle now that we've seen it, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you mentioned ambiguity. So how does disambiguation capacity in ChatGPT or similar tools affect the accuracy of output, from your opinion?
Yeah, so from what I've seen and when I've discussed it with colleagues, it does all right with like high profile subjects, people who have a very distinct online profile. Now, oftentimes these might not be the subjects where we put a whole load of enhanced research into. Somebody who's been sanctioned might already be kicked out in the screening stage from a viable relationship. So when looking at it, you can direct it. It might not be as comprehensive. They might miss certain things, but you can prod the technology to look again, and it will reiterate its query to be more inclusive. But it is I think from an enhanced due diligence perspective, or really from a research perspective, the lack of sources also makes it very difficult. As I say, if you look at John Smith A versus John Smith B, and there's an inflammatory accusation, you will want to know where it comes from in order to make a determination whether or not this is correct, and then make a decision based on that. And so in the event that it is not great for disambiguation, or because it is not great for disambiguation, poses a great challenge, actually makes a lot more work. I think at this point it just makes it very difficult in practicality to use.
Mm-hmm. So are there different sources? So you mentioned the ChatGPT is using the data from a cutoff of 2024 or 2021. It's also new to GPT-4, the same data, or is it just black box, or how it works?
Yeah, so GPT-4 has the same data set. Now, I think from the technology itself, nothing hinders it to put data sets inside of it that could feed it. I think currently the enterprise iteration would be able to do that, but it's not really widely available to the market. But another problem that arises with the lack of sources currently is also how do you determine the legitimacy of the underlying source? The internet is a wide place where a lot of things are being said that might not necessarily always be the epiphany of accuracy. So being able to distinguish whether or not a source is valid in the context, or whether it is just some person making an allegation is rather important, right? when it comes to decision making. So the black box effect of the sources kind of fits in with that. We don't really therefore we can't determine the validity of the sources, and we don't really know is a blog gonna have the same validity as an article by the New York Times? Yeah.
All right. So you mentioned some legislation, especially in the EU. And what are some specific legislative hurdles that companies, compliance teams may want to consider when assessing the potential use of these tools in their processes?
Yeah, so I think data privacy is a big one. Unless you have a licensed version, I think it's one of those issues where we are all acutely aware of. It's something that's a very big reality in the day-to-day work life. So I don't think that comes to anybody's surprise. But I also think there'll be issues when it comes to licensing of underlying sources. This kind of puts a wrench in what we know about digesting text and output. What does this mean for publishers? Would they be happy about it? I don't have the answer to that, but I'd assume like having a core summary of everything that you've ever written doesn't exactly match with what you'd want to bring to the market. And then I think there's, again, these kind of different levels that we need to distinguish. Like, is this something maybe that you could use to write a social media post? And I think the implication is going to, from a legislative perspective, be very different than when somebody uses something like this to make a job application decision. And these are the examples that we see when discussing legislation, for example, on the EU level, right? You have to make sure that there's a proportionality of how the technology is used versus the decision that the output is there. So yeah, I think licensing, data privacy are probably two really big ones that we'll see coming down probably faster than other things. But again, as I said, the possibility has been opened now. It's hard to take it away again. So the question is like, how are we standing when it comes to being able to legislate this when our frameworks weren't really envisioning the prowess of this type of technology, and then also the speed. I mean, we've seen basically, I think, since November 2022, we are now in March. We've got a new version that went from 3,000 word output to 25,000 word output. It can understand pictographic input of handwriting. It's the speed of the development is astounding, and usually legislative processes take a rather long time. So I suppose that we'll see kind of a push and pull from both of these sources, but it's certainly worthwhile keeping an eye on it from copyright perspectives, for example, as well.
Yeah. So there are some, you mentioned that the implementation possibilities will be kind of much slower than just you taking these tools and just starting using it. So what measures can organizations take to ensure that automated processes or using AI are compliant, comprehensive, and unbiased?
Yeah, I think it's one thing to get excited about a technology like this, and it's another, and I think it's to the frustration of many people, it's another to actually be able to use it. So I think the vetting process is really where it comes in. You have to be sure that it protects sensitive information. You have to be sure that the data privacy is accurate. You have to be sure that it's fit for purpose. You cannot make critical business decisions based on a technology where you don't fully understand how it works or how it guarantees the quality of output. So I think it's really about being cognizant about the different pitfalls. It's of course, it's one of those things where, does that mean we stifle innovation? Potentially, although I don't necessarily think so. I think it's to critically assess what technologies are meant to do. ChatGPT and similar technologies are incredibly exciting, and they're great at what they're doing. They're not meant to perform a compliance function, and therefore they're not meant to fit into our particular box that we are trying to make it fit. But what it can do is that it can push us to find solutions that are able to give us the transparency, the accuracy, the speed that we need to make these kind of exciting developments applicable for our industry at large.
Fantastic. So if we summarize our interview, if someone who is listening to this interview would like to walk away with one or two major takeaways, what would it be?
I think I think I would say that it is very exciting, and it is going to push the boundaries of what is possible, and we should dream big, so to speak, in terms of wanting to have and trying to push for technologies that can enable compliance professionals and the compliance industry to leverage the speed and power of it, but also to be just conscious of what we are trying to achieve with our decision making, and therefore be a little bit more maybe on the safe side when it comes to the rapid adaptation of it. I think trusting technology can be difficult within the framework of our professions, but there's always a margin of error that's necessary when we look at technologies and their application. But ultimately, I think, yeah, let's be exciting. Let's try to push for applications, but let's also be aware that there might be some things that within our particular context remain in the realm of those that people are just best to do.
All right, fantastic. That's were all my questions. Perhaps if I forgot something, would you like to add whatever helps our audience?
Oh, I think we've covered a lot of ground here today, Boris.
All right, Laetitia, thank you very much. And I think it was a very useful interview specifically on this topic that people have to understand and maybe implement as soon as possible. So I hope we will stay in touch with you and your company, and we'll wish you a great success in your career.
Thank you very much. It's great speaking. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.